Coach Lee here, and today we're going to talk about how to improve endurance. The question on every runner's mind of how do we run faster, how do we run further, and what I like to define endurance as is resisting fatigue. So if we can make ourselves more economical, we can improve our fitness, we therefore obviously minimize the fatigue that kicks in when running at a certain speed, therefore we can potentially run at that speed for longer, or just being able to move for longer distances without seeing a reduction in performance. I like to simply term endurance as being able to resist fatigue. We have three main avenues that we can develop endurance, and that is through our VO2 max, i.e. the ability to take on board, utilize and deliver oxygen to the working muscles. We have run economy. So every time our foot hits the ground and absorbs that impact and then produces force into the ground to propel us forwards, that costs us energy through muscle contraction. We can improve the efficiency of that. Therefore, obviously, the energy cost overall for running is reduced. So that allows us again to either run at a certain effort for longer without seeing that fatigue coming in, or obviously being able to run at slightly quicker speeds with less energy demand. And then the final one, building endurance, we look at the metabolic processes. So that's how we improve the ability for us to essentially break down our food, process it and use it for energy, and therefore obviously being able to put out a certain speed or pace or be able to move for a certain amount of time or over a certain distance. In terms of the priority and the kind of the more applicable ways to develop endurance for ultra runners, we definitely want to focus more on the metabolic side. Obviously the other two do have a part to play, but certainly the most important of those three is developing the metabolic processes. So let's just have a quick look at all three in turn. So VO2 max, obviously the one that everyone knows about. Most watches nowadays chuck out a number and say your VO2 max is this, and then describes it whether it's good or fair or weak, etc. And straight away for me, I don't ever look at all that stuff on my watch because it's completely pointless. Straight away though, that then tells people and puts them in a box of where they are in terms of their fitness. And there's a few issues that I have with that. Number one, it's coming from a watch, which isn't as accurate anyway. So if you want to truly know your VO2 max, go and get a gaseous exchange test done in a lab or somewhere like the endurance store. And that will give you a proper value of your VO2 max. Two, we place so much stock into this number as though that's going to predict our ability and our performance when we race. And we've seen in the research that that's just not the case. We've seen runners with lower VO2 maxes outperform runners with higher VO2 maxes. So we've seen all this time and time again on road running and road racing, where it's a bit more of a predictable environment that we obviously operate and train in. So if we're seeing that VO2 max doesn't even necessarily correlate with performance on predictable running environments, what about when we then go into ultra distance, which typically ends up being off-road and in some cases, high elevation gain, elevation loss, mountainous terrain, etc., where we've also then got to take into account nutrition, especially as we run further and for longer, and that nutrition plays an even more important part of our ability to express that fitness. So if we've seen that VO2 max doesn't correlate with performance in a predictable environment, what about if you are rubbish at descending on technical terrain? What if you don't have a good nutritional strategy or you get things wrong? Then your VO2 max again means nothing in terms of your actual race performance. So straight away for me personally, yes, we can look at developing it from a perspective of being able to then improve other attributes such as lactate threshold, etc. But in terms of preparation for an ultra event, it's certainly low down on the list of something to develop, and certainly something you should be focused on developing, if you can indeed develop it, further away from the race rather than close to the race itself. VO2 max is also influenced by genetics and age. So again, those are things that you can't change. So obviously there's going to be limitations to what your VO2 max actually can be trained up to. So all of that to me suggests that it should be lower on the list in terms of what you're looking to address when it comes to improving your endurance or that ability to resist fatigue. Next, then you have run economy. So like we said there, that's the energy cost per step in or stride as we're propelling ourselves forward in running. We can improve that quite simply through just being more efficient at running, i.e. getting better at it, whether that's looking at improving technique or whether that's just running more, so that obviously your mind-muscle connection, the neuromuscular pathways become more efficient at building that blueprint of how you run and therefore becoming more efficient with it. Just like you see when you're lifting heavy weights and things like that, you become more efficient at those movements just as you learn the skill of that movement, let alone before you start increasing the weight. So we can obviously develop run economy that way, which then brings me nicely on to strength training, which is another way to develop run economy. If we can improve the force production capabilities of a muscle, i.e. make it stronger, then that means the impact forces we absorb and the force that we need to produce to propel us forwards is going to cost us less energy because our muscles are way stronger than what they need to be. Therefore, it's going to cost less oxygen per muscle contraction. So for me personally, if we're looking at run economy as an ultra runner, again, the main way that you probably see people talking about improving run economy, other than obviously just getting out and running, is through things like drills and strides and all that sort of thing. Strides are a great way obviously to starting to introduce a bit of speed work, and therefore you can get a little bit more efficient with your running. But for me personally, drills and A skips and B skips and all that stuff, which we see a lot of road runners and sprinters use to try and also improve their run economy and their technique, it doesn't have as big of a part to play when it comes to ultra running. Again, if you think, because we change our foot strike quite a bit depending on the terrain we're running on, depending on whether we're climbing or descending, obviously the unpredictable nature of ultra running itself, as I mentioned before, I don't place a huge amount of stock in doing a lot of these drills and stuff like that for off-road runners. So if you're looking to address running economy, which I think is a potential worthy avenue to address, then for me the best way to do it is, one, obviously just run and obviously get out regularly and train regularly and consistently. That will help build that efficiency. If you're looking at things like hill descending, again, it's developing that skill over time, which will then help improve the confidence and therefore again make you a little bit more efficient. But the main way that I would suggest looking at run economy is through strength training. As I said, improving your force production capabilities, lifting heavy weights, in the kind of the 5 to 8 rep range on certain movements, or developing a bit of power, which can also improve your force production capabilities, and that's moving at kind of a challenging weight but at speed for low reps as well. Final one, the metabolic processes. So that's where we're now looking at improving the ability to produce energy aerobically, break down food into ATP predominantly from aerobic mechanisms, which then produce no waste products and therefore minimize anything building up in the body and causing that fatigue. So therefore, obviously, if we can improve that capability, we obviously improve our fatigue resistance capability. And that allows us to then sustain higher outputs for longer, or obviously being able to move into quicker speeds for again, longer durations. So there's a couple of ways that we can do that. The first one is reduce the amount of lactate that builds up in the body in the first place. So when we produce energy, one of the avenues that we do that creates a product called pyruvate, and with that creates lactate. And obviously lactate itself is absolutely fine to build up. It's utilized in energy production and can be recycled into aerobic energy production. So what we want to do though is to try and manage the amount that's produced and the amount it builds up. And obviously one of the best ways is that we can recycle that, as I said there, into aerobic energy production. So if we improve our aerobic capacity, therefore we start to do things like recruit more mitochondria, which is one of the main powerhouses that helps convert this energy. So therefore we make that process more efficient and therefore reduce the lactate buildup. However, again, depending on the intensity that we're running at, we will see that buildup of lactate, and therefore once it's not able to be recycled or utilized in energy production, it then starts to go into the bloodstream, which then even at that point we can start to utilize it with the brain and the liver and stuff like that. But as it starts to get to uncontrollable levels or high levels, we then start to see these hydrogen ions build up as well, which is what causes the acidity in the bloodstream, and therefore that's what causes that reduction in performance. If we do indeed see a build up in lactate, we want to be able to clear it effectively as well. We want to be able to get it to the brain, the liver and stuff in the bloodstream, be able to clear it as quickly as possible so it's not hanging around. And both of those sort of qualities of improving the metabolic processes are developed in different ways, but they are going to have the biggest bang for your buck in terms of improving your ability as an ultra runner. So those are the 3 ways to build endurance. Obviously, VO2 max can be done with max intensity intervals and sprints and things like that. You can also improve VO2 max to a degree just from volume of training, especially building that aerobic capacity with lots of obviously easy to moderate running and improving volume over time. We can obviously improve VO2 max to a degree with that. Run economy, I've said there, obviously we can address that through strength training. And then in terms of the metabolic processes, obviously like I said, we have 2 avenues. If we want to just become more efficient at aerobic energy production in the first place and recycling that lactate as and when it's needed, that's where we again look at much more easy to moderate running, building up that aerobic capacity, getting the benefits such as capillarization, recruiting more mitochondria to make our motor more efficient at recycling the food and producing that ATP. We want to be able to buffer that buildup of lactate and clear it quicker. Then that's where we want to look at things like improving our lactate threshold, where we then look at working just below that intensity, which obviously you can determine from a field fitness test. It's not obviously as accurate as a gaseous exchange test, but for most of us it's going to do the job of giving us a starting point, and therefore gives us a number or heart rate to be able to operate in and around or just underneath, with things like tempo effort intervals or continuous tempo runs and stuff like that, to be able to improve the ability of clearing that lactate efficiently. And that's why we do those runs where we operate just below it to increase the amount of lactate that's being produced to that point where it's just below the levels of it starting to become a negative thing on the body. Then we obviously have a period of recovery, and therefore obviously it allows us to become more efficient at clearing it away. That's it. That's how to build endurance. It's not rocket science. It's obviously applying a stimulus to develop a certain fitness attribute. When it comes to ultra running, the metabolic side of things are the most relevant to ultra distance, especially the aerobic capacity and volume of training. We know that obviously we have mileage minimums and all that sort of thing for ultra distance, and the easiest way to develop these over time is to block out training. Focus a block of training on a specific attribute whilst maintaining others. So an example, developing your lactate threshold to improve the clearance of lactate for 5-6 weeks. You then focus on 2, maybe even 3 tempo runs in a week, whilst then maintaining your aerobic capacity through volume of training with the easy to moderate runs, or keeping a moderate distance long run in there. You do that for a period of weeks. You retest your lactate threshold through the 30-minute time trial, see improvements, then you move on to a different fitness attribute, whilst then maybe keeping in 1 tempo run a week or every other week, just to maintain that fitness that you've built in that particular attribute, whilst then trying to develop another one. That's a basic periodization of training there, which can be very successful in terms of developing fitness overall and in long term. Obviously, when you then have a race, you then get back into another bit of period of training. You come back to developing your lactate threshold even further. You improve that over another training block of 5-6 weeks. And again, it's just a cyclical process then of going from one attribute to the other whilst maintaining. And over the year, you may have developed each attribute once or twice. And then you just continue that year on year. That's developing endurance. You think about it as a month-to-month, year-to-year process, not just a day-to-day or week-to-week or race-to-race, Especially when we look at the metabolic processes, they are very trainable qualities that can be improved for years and years and years compared to things like VO2 max and run economy. So again, that's why you should focus most of your effort on lots of volume, easy to moderate effort, and then splicing in things like tempo work rather than doing, lots of 400-meter sprints and stuff like that as an ultra runner. And that's pretty much everything that I would discuss. It'd be great if you've got any questions, just chuck them in the comments below if you want me to expand on anything else. And at this point in time, if you want to see any particular content delivered, if you've got any particular points you would like me to talk about, or you want some advice on a specific thing, again, just chuck them in the comments below. It'd be great if you can like and subscribe this video. I'm really wanting to get into making much more YouTube content and therefore helping runners with long form videos rather than the 10-second clickbaits and stuff that we tend to see on social medias. For me, there's so much confusing information out there. I want this channel to be somewhere where people can come and just get what they need to become a better ultra runner or complete their first ultra, and that's the goal with this. So if there's any content you want to see, chuck in the comments below. Please share the video with anyone you think will be of benefit to, and yeah, anything else, just chuck it in the comments or drop me an email, lee@ultramarathoncoach.co.uk.